In January of 2020, New York State enacted bail reform laws to prevent many people who cannot afford to post bail from sitting in jail while they're awaiting trial. Since then, many have been speaking out against the new laws. Broadcasting Buffalo starts right now. Welcome to Broadcasting Buffalo. I'm your host, Brian Meyer. Tonight, we'll take an in-depth look at bail reform in New York State. Alessia Gervasi has more.
Jail cells like these aren't as crowded as they used to be since bail reform was put into effect in 2020.
Fairness is the key here.
New York State enacted bail reform legislation to make sure people who are economically disadvantaged were not being held on bail for nonviolent crimes. Erie County District Attorney John Flynn says the legislation eliminated the need for people to pay bail on most misdemeanors.
They came up with a rule that said that all misdemeanors, which would include like stealing a candy bar, all misdemeanors and some nonviolent felonies, that judges can no longer put bail on someone.
Since bail reform took effect, critics have had many issues with it.
Bail brings people back to court. That's why it's there.
Robert Orr is the New York State Senate Minority Leader. He has a number of issues with bail reform.
We've seen an increase in recidivism, which is repeat offenses. We've seen an increase in violent crime across the state. And we've seen people who otherwise would have been able to be held for gun charges, for assaults, for robberies, for theft, especially if they were repeat offenders, they can no longer be held.
Dean Palaio is the Alma Town Justice and also advises other town judges in his district. He says that the idea behind bail is to ensure that defendants come back to court.
And the problem is, it's not a problem, but there's no minor consequences. So for just stealing a car, if you're 16 or 17, you brought in your appearance ticket, you go home. And you could do that 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, and you just keep going home.
DA Flynn says that he would like to see some changes to allow judges to consider public safety when deciding to set bail.
The only state in the country where public safety is not a factor in setting bail. Every other state in the country has some form of public safety that the judge can put in their mind.
Governor Kathy Hochul acknowledges that there are some shortcomings with the bail reform legislation, and she is proposing changes to the bail reform process.
There is an inconsistency in our law right now. That's what I'm striving to fix with respect to the least restrictive means in particular. So there have been very productive conversations in this room, many meetings as recently as yesterday, and regular conversation about how we meet our mutual objectives of protecting public safety.
Lawmakers continue to negotiate changes to bail reform as part of the ongoing state budget talks. Once a decision is reached, we will have more information on our website at broadcastingbuffalo.com. For Broadcasting Buffalo, I'm Alessia Gervasi.
Thank you, Alessia. When we come back, I'll be joined by retired State Supreme Court Justice Penny Wolfgang. Also joining the discussion will be defense attorney Rob Singer. See you in just a moment.
Hello, Buffalo. I'm Ed Asner. You may remember me as television's no-nonsense news director Lou Grant. And if you think about it, journalists provide us with our first draft of history. Right here in Buffalo, more than 50 years of TV news coverage is being brought back to life. Local stations are working with the Buffalo Broadcasters Association to bring back the stories that helped define the Niagara frontier.
the Pheasant Lane neighborhood, where drifts reach to the rooftops.
It's called the Archive Project, and I support it with all my heart. So should you.
No matter the occasion, Premier Gourmet is here for you. Featuring Buffalo's best craft beer selection, grocery store items, coffee, and gifts. Find locally made Buffalo products and everything you need for your home bar. Visit premiergourmet.com.
Experience Buffalo and Erie County's unique stories with the new Buffalo History Museum podcast. Connect with Western New York's history as you listen to detailed narratives about heritage, architecture, business, innovation, and significant events and people throughout time. The podcast takes inspiration from the museum's collection and beyond, from experts on staff and featured guests. From the 1918 influenza to F. Scott Fitzgerald, experience the stories that make up our region. The Buffalo History Museum podcast. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
Well, welcome back to Broadcasting Buffalo. I'm Brian Meyer. I'm joined tonight by the Honorable Penny Wolfgang and Defense Attorney Rob Singer. It's a pleasure to have both of you with us this evening. Bail reform has been a major lightning rod issue here in New York State for several years. We want to mention that as we have this conversation, there are discussions going on in Albany that may very well change the landscape by the time our viewers see this show. Judge Wolfgang, give us your thoughts on this bail reform debate.
Well, I think it's one of those issues, or there are many issues, but the bail reform itself, it's like a hot button topic that people just react to one way or another, don't strongly without realizing, and it's become a political issue, which is very unusual in my lifetime for something like bail or anything related to the courts to be such a political issue. I really have been shocked at the public's reaction and all of the politicians and legislators and one going one way, one going the other, on something that affects the courts and affects society and the criminal justice system in such a large way, but yet usually would not attract the politicians' attention. But I think the reason it's become such a hot button issue, obviously, is because it relates to crime, and it relates to the what we think is the uptick of crime, or what we hear is, especially in major cities, and gun violence. And I think it's all wrapped into this one issue.
And Rob, we probably should point out that when these bail reforms were enacted in 2020, supporters basically said that a lot of it was trying to sort of reduce the impact of judicial bias in the bail process. Your thoughts on that? Now, you're a defense attorney now, but you previously were a prosecutor, so you kind of see it from both sides.
That's correct, and I think one of the concerns I think that prompted the discussion was the social justice movement that came out in 2020. But I think a lot of it was somewhat before that, and the reason why was because people were looking at how certain counties, downstate, upstate, middle of the state, dealt with bail, and there were differences, and some of them were stark, and a lot of it related down to racial lines. And so I think the point of the legislature in trying to enact some of these reforms was to take that bias out, as you said. I think a lot of the discussion Judge Wolfgang was talking about earlier, it's kind of interesting because when I look at this, I always look at what does the empirical evidence show? We knew that there was some type of bias that may exist in cases before the reform, but I think a lot of the discussion lately has been delving into topics that are based on emotion as opposed to what the evidence shows about people's recidivism rates, people's appearance rates, which I think is the most important in this. And there's only been a handful of studies that have been done to do that. And so what's interesting to me is that the legislature and the governor and the public are taking this up as a debate, but there's not a lot of information about why people feel certain ways. And sometimes I feel like there's information that's put out there that's not accurate.
Because, Judge,
I agree.
Proponents of this existing law are saying that it's been a great success, that there haven't been, there's been a drop in the number of people who show up. In other words, there's not been that problem that a lot of people thought. What do you make of this information that seems to be on a collision course.
It's typical of, for example, when they do polling, it depends on who asks the questions and who does the polling, and I notice, and where. And particularly in this question that we're talking about, where means a lot, because as was just pointed out, everything seems to revolve around what happens downstate, what happens in the 5 boroughs, for example. And the people that proposed this law and saw the inequity, they didn't, I don't think, look at what inequity there was in upstate New York, for example, in Buffalo, how the bail was, being imposed or not being imposed, and who was not returning for court. It all as you said, I think just now, revolved around like a social justice as opposed to legal issues.
And as we speak, in mid-April, Governor Hochul continues to push a multi-point plan that would reform the bail reform law. What do each of you make of the provisions in the governor's proposal?
So I think my biggest concern is the removal of a standard. New York State, as well as the federal system, as well as many other states across the country, have had a system put in place that judges, when they look at bail, should impose the least restrictive conditions to ensure a person's appearance. And I think it's something that's an anchor for defense attorneys to argue about why their clients should appear and why conditions are necessary and unnecessary, for a prosecutor to use arguments as far as what's necessary and not, and then for a judge to weigh all that, as I know Judge Wolfgang did for many, many years, and provide a mechanism so that there's a fair point. And I feel like if that anchor is removed, it's really going to put the system into uncharted waters, because there's not going to be a standard that a judge can evaluate from, a prosecutor can argue from, and a defense attorney can make counter-arguments on.
Judge, what are your thoughts?
Well, the least restrictive bail argument that Rob just made and that we're talking about was not actually what the law said prior to this bail reform. As far as bail goes, it might have been inherently understood that the court should impose the least restrictive, but it wasn't a standard. There were other factors that we were permitted to consider in setting bail, which now it seems to be not relevant when we can't. It's very amorphous, and I think we might need a standard, but we do need more discretion. And we have to be clear, the legislators, I think, are trying to be clear as to what is discretionary and what isn't, and how far the courts can go in using their discretion.
Because that's what some of the folks who are pushing against changes to the existing law are saying. They're saying, wait a minute, judges already have discretion.
Well, in some instances we do not, because there's offenses where now listed and enumerated in the law where you cannot set cash bail, which we could have in the past. And so that takes away discretion right there. So they're saying, oh, they're nonviolent crimes, or they're misdemeanors, or they're minor crimes, but they can be, in some instances, a real danger to society by their recidivism, by the repetition of it. For an example, stealing a car now has turned out to be can be a very serious crime. It may be just listed as a misdemeanor, let's say, or as a lesser crime, but as we can see, if the car is stolen and crashes into some other person, hits somebody, runs them over, there's a lot of ramifications, and a lot of ramifications sadly, to the person whose car was stolen. It may seem like just a little thing, but stealing a car for a joyride, but it really can be detrimental and to the person whose car is stolen. They lose their livelihood, they can't get the insurance, there's a lot. And the fact of the matter is that seeing that these young people are thinking of it as a joke, or, oh, we're going to steal a car today, come with us, let's see if we can get a Honda or whatever the heck car that is that they seem to be stealing. I don't mean to denigrate Hondas, because it's first thing, it's not the right Kia.
Yes. I drive a Honda.
I don't know. Sorry, but all I know is that to do it time and time again, and know that you're going to get away with it, and know that there's no repercussions, that all they're going to say is when they catch you, don't do that again,
right,
is there's no deterrent, and that's serious.
We have so many more angles to talk about. We are looking at bail reform, and coming up, we'll continue speaking about this hot button issue with Judge Wolfgang and defense attorney Rob Singer. We'll be right back.
This is a college that inspires. Here you'll be engaged, strive for excellence, and prepare for a career. Visit our amazing Elmwood Village campus and apply today. You'll achieve your edge here. This place is Buffalo State College.
Your life has taught you a lot. Now your experience can help change a child's life. Read to Succeed and AARP Experience Corps are looking for local volunteers, 50 and older, to help children in Buffalo City schools learn to read. You'll receive training to help you be a great tutor. You have what it takes to change a young person's life. The experience may even change your own. Volunteer by going to readtosucceedbuffalo.org.
No matter the occasion, Premier Gourmet is here for you. Featuring Buffalo's best craft beer selection, grocery store items, coffee, and gifts. Find locally made Buffalo products and everything you need for your home bar. Visit premiergourmet.com.
Welcome back to Broadcasting Buffalo. I'm Brian Meyer, and tonight we've been talking about bail reform here in New York State. I'm here with retired Supreme Court Justice Penny Wolfgang and with defense attorney Rob Singer. We do thank you for joining us. This has been a very controversial issue here as we tape in mid-April. There are efforts to reform the bail reforms that took effect in early 2020, and a lot of controversy on both sides of the aisle. Our top prosecutor here in Erie County, John Flynn, has said that bail reform has achieved many desired effects, but he views the biggest problem where it went, quote, too far, he tells the Buffalo News, was on the more serious violent crimes issue. Rob, your thought about that?
This is where I disagree with District Attorney Flynn. I know a lot of my colleagues and I have a concern about this because when you take a look at it, a judge has discretion, and the violent felonies that bail does apply to, there's various things besides cash bail that a judge can do. A judge can put someone on type of release with conditions where they have curfews or where they're monitored by electronic monitoring. They can also assign a probation officer to look after that individual when they're on bail. They can also take a look at other conditions that they can put in as far as treatment, whether that's drug or anger management or other types of things that can help address, and particularly mental health, concerns that would not lead to a person appearing. But I guess when I look at it, one of the concerns that the defense bar has always had, because the person's cloaked with the presumption of innocence until they're proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt at a trial or through a plea, is that the purpose of bail is not to punish anyone. The purpose of bail is not to make sure that dangerous people are taken off the street. The purpose of bail is to assure someone to appear for trial. And sometimes something short of a monetary condition can effectively ensure that a person appears. I'm not saying that in all violent felonies, particularly very serious ones like murder or sexual assault or crimes involving children, that cash bail is not an answer. I think oftentimes it is, and probably it should be. But it shouldn't be the only answer.
As a former reporter, I, for many years, was in your court for bail hearings and some of the more serious crimes. What do you make of the criticism that has been leveled by many people that the biggest issue with the current bail laws involve those violent offenses?
A lot of what Rob said I agree with, and it's true. However, the major crimes that I've just pointed out, murder, manslaughter, assault, sexual matters, very, very often domestic relations matters, which may be lower grade assaults start out that way, but as we well know, can end up in major felonies, and very often do. There are choices, that, as Rob pointed out, other forms of bail are available, but there are times when it doesn't seem to the court that the right thing to do would be to have this person back on the street. not only because of the dangerousness to the citizens, to the victim, whoever the victim may be, but because of the character also of the defendant. Because in each individual case we do look at, we are entitled to, and we do in setting bail, under the old law pretty much, look at the character, not just the record, but the employment. Does a person have a job? Does he support he or she support their family? And where are they going to go when we release them? And yes, probation can take care of that, but in some cases, but still, I feel like the court is taking a chance that this person is not going to commit this crime again while they're out on bail. So it's a slippery slope what my consideration is, but I may be saying, oh, I'm considering the person won't come back or appear, and yes, bail, yes, the defendant's presumed innocent, yes, the purpose of bail is to assure the appearance of the defendant, but what is the certainty of the appearance of the defendant when he's assaulting this, woman, let's say, that the minute he gets out, he goes back again and does it again, or he's, this is his third or fourth felony, and he's a danger to the community. And even though we can't say it that way, we have to wrap it up in the fact that he has no incentive to appear again.
Yeah, Rob, some are saying that there need to be distinctions involving gun-related arrests. That's where you need to have the teeth in bail laws.
I think sometimes that's true. I think bail is sometimes appropriate in those situations. I think what I look at, though, is kind of what we were talking about earlier with the empirical research. What the research showed over the course of the last 2.5, 3 years since the reforms went in place was that when persons are released without bail on those types of crimes, the recidivism rate is very, very low. And so that was what the intent of the bail law was, is not to have someone sitting behind bars when they're presumed innocent just simply because they have a gun. Now, that's possession of a weapon as opposed to use of a weapon. And so there's situations where that's going to turn into a violent offense. Gun crimes, are classified in New York as violent offenses. And so a lot of the tools that are available in a bail situation are available to judges at this point. And
because the supporters of the existing laws are pointing to things like recidivism and saying that, hey, why are you even thinking of tinkering with the stuff that works? Your point is, though, you can, statistics can prove anything, essentially.
And what about common sense? What about the likelihood, as we said, criminal possession of a weapon is, maybe a misdemeanor, it could even be a misdemeanor, or a low-grade felony, and not cash bail is not available, so you can't. Well, what is the likelihood that the person is going to use the gun? I mean, if you have it and you've got it in your possession and you're out on the street, that's step number one to being a danger to the community, for sure.
Yeah, and I know we're running out of time. I know, Judge, you wanted to talk about the discovery law changes, and we don't want to turn this into a law school class, but just briefly, what is your concern with that?
Well, I think that's going to be addressed in the new laws. That's one of the governor's issues, and really it's upsetting the criminal justice system to a great degree, where the discovery, which means what has to be turned over by the prosecutor to the defense within a certain period of time, witnesses, names of witnesses, information from the police, 9/11 calls and so forth. They've moved the discovery time up for 10 days or sometimes less, sometimes a little more, whereas that used to be prior to trial. Well, actually, that 10-day period is a great burden on the criminal justice system, from starting with the police down to the prosecutor and to the trial, getting the case to trial. And a lot of people, a lot of defendants who should not have their cases dismissed are being dismissed in lower courts, especially because the people can't do that.
Rob, your short review of the whole discovery law issue.
Certainly, this is my biggest concern about any type of rollback, is I think the discovery laws put in place have been one of the most important things, if not the most important thing, perhaps even larger than the bail issue. And the reason why is because when I'm counseling a defendant about what they should do as far as a plea of guilty or not, when I wasn't given discovery in the past, and frequently in federal court, I don't have an open discovery law, it's even less than New York State, I'm in the same type of vacuum. I can't counsel them, and they can't make informed choices about what to do. And so in New York, we frequently saw a lot of people pleading guilty simply to get out of jail or simply to get the case over with, when if I got the evidence, I'd realize there's a hole here I can go through.
So much more to talk about. I thank both of you for being here tonight. Very interesting. And when we return, we will wrap things up.
Experience Buffalo and Erie County's unique stories with the new Buffalo History Museum podcast. Connect with Western New York's history as you listen to detailed narratives about heritage, architecture, business, innovation, and significant events and people throughout time. The podcast takes inspiration from the museum's collection and beyond, from experts on staff and featured guests. From the 1918 influenza to F. Scott Fitzgerald, experience the stories that make up our region. The Buffalo History Museum podcast. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
No matter the occasion, the Premier Group is here for you. Take advantage of our easy online ordering and curbside pickup, or shop the finest selection of unique wines, spirits, and gifts at any of our 3 independently owned Western New York locations.
Hello, Buffalo. I'm Ed Asner. You may remember me as television's no-nonsense news director Lou Grant. And if you think about it, journalists provide us with our first draft of history. Right here in Buffalo, more than 50 years of TV news coverage is being brought back to life. Local stations are working with the Buffalo Broadcasters Association to bring back the stories that helped define the Niagara frontier.
The Pheasant Lane neighborhood, where drifts reach to the rooftops.
It's called the Archive Project, and I support it with all my heart. So should you.
Well, welcome back to Broadcasting Buffalo. We've been talking about certainly one of the more controversial issues here in New York State, bail reform. And as we talk here in mid-April, a lot is in flux in Albany. Maybe by the time this is airing, there will have been some decisions made and some votes taken. We thank both of you for joining us this evening. We probably could have taped for another hour and still not had all our questions answered. On behalf of the Buffalo Broadcasters Association and everyone at Buffalo State University and Canisius College, thank you again for joining us for this episode of Broadcasting Buffalo. If you'd like more information about bail reform, visit our website at broadcastingbuffalo.com. Thank you again for joining us and have a great night.